The most dangerous people aren't the ones who break your heart with a loud argument. It's the ones who use your strength as a shield to hide their own cowardice, and then systematically erase themselves the exact moment your life gets heavy. For Clara, the realization didn't come from a confession. It started with the scent of citrus bleach. The citrus bleach was the first thing that felt wrong. Julian never cleaned. The citrus bleach was the first thing that felt wrong. Julian never cleaned. Clara dropped her hospital bag onto the floor, her fingers still trembling from 30 hours of waiting room coffee and the raw terror of her mother's critical diagnosis. She just needed 60 seconds of his weight against her. Julian. The loft was dead silent. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes landing on the dark quartz island. It had been wiped down to a sterile, unnatural shine. Sitting precisely in the center was his matte navy ceramic travel mug. Every single morning, she brewed his dark roast and filled it a quarter-inch below the rim so it wouldn't spill during his drive. Beside the mug lay his house keys, aligned perfectly parallel to the edge of the stone. A cold, heavy weight dropped into Clara's stomach. She pushed open the bedroom door. The bed was stripped down to the mattress protector. No sheets, no pillows. She threw open the wardrobe. Empty, not a single wooden hanger clinked. The space where his tailored blazers usually hung was entirely bare, leaving nothing but the faint, mocking scent of his sandalwood cologne. He hadn't packed in a panicked rush. This was a calculated, silent extraction. While she was sitting in a plastic chair holding her mother's frail hand, listening to the rhythmic beep of an ICU monitor, Julian had been systematically folding his life out of hers. He didn't leave a note. He left the keys. Her phone buzzed violently in her palm. The screen flashed. Dr. Eris ICU. Clara stood frozen in the vacuum of his absence, the phone ringing out, realizing the exact day she finally needed someone to hold her up. She was entirely alone. "He's just parking," Clara lied. She didn't look at Dr. Eris. Instead, she stared at her thumb, meticulously tracing a raw, bleeding split in her cuticle. Her mother's ICU room was suffocatingly quiet, save for the rhythmic, mechanical click of the ventilator. "He'll be up in a few minutes," she added, her voice a flat, practiced calm. She sat in the vinyl chair for 9 hours, her phone resting face down on her knee. Every time the screen lit up with a low battery warning, her stomach dropped. The silence from Julian wasn't just an absence of words. It was a deliberate, heavy pressure pinning her to the seat. At 8:42 p.m., the text finally arrived. "I can't give you what you need right now, Clara. The launch is next week. I need to focus. I left my keys on the counter." She stared at the words until the blue glare burned her eyes. What you need. As if her mother's heart failing was a personal choice she had made to inconvenience his schedule. 3 weeks ago, when he spiraled until dawn about his investor deck, she had stayed awake, rubbed his back, and fixed his slides. He had wept into her shoulder, whispering, "I only survive because you're so strong." The memory felt like a physical strike to her throat. He hadn't loved her strength. He had just used it as a shield to hide his own cowardice. Clara stood up, her limbs stiff. She reached into her coat pocket and felt the cold, matte navy ceramic mug she had instinctively grabbed from the counter before leaving. She had brought it to fill with hospital coffee, a reflex of care she didn't know how to stop. Looking down at the mug, the realization was freezing. She had spent 5 years keeping someone warm who wouldn't even stand in the rain with her. The grab bar slipped out of her greasy fingers, striking the bathroom porcelain with a deafening clang. Clara leaned her forehead against the cold tile, her chest shaking. It had been 4 days. Her mother was finally asleep in the next room, resting after her first morning out of the hospital. Clara had spent the last 6 hours organizing pill bottles, tracking dosages, and scrubbing floors, moving with the rigid mechanical precision of a clock. She was surviving on sheer momentum. She reached down into her tote bag to grab her measuring tape, but her hand brushed the matte navy ceramic travel mug instead. She pulled it out, intending to set it on the sink, but her grip failed. The mug slipped, plunging into the porcelain basin before crashing onto the tiled floor. It didn't shatter. It just bounced once, leaving a deep, jagged white chip right across the drinking rim. Clara stared at the flaw. It was permanent. The mug could never hold heat again without leaking. It could never return to the sterile counter where Julian had left it. A sharp, ugly sob tore out of her throat before she could choke it down. She collapsed onto the bathroom floor, her back sliding against the tub, pulling her knees tightly to her chest. For 96 hours, she had fiercely protected his image, telling herself he was just panicked by the launch. But looking at the broken ceramic, the illusion shattered. She hadn't lost a partner. She had spent 5 years funding a ghost who vanished the exact moment she stopped being convenient. Sitting in the quiet of her mother's house, surrounded by medical supplies, Clara finally let herself break. The quote on the screen read, "We built this from nothing through absolute, uncompromised focus." Clara stared at Julian's face on the tech blog homepage, her fingers frozen over her trackpad. The article highlighted his startup's massive new funding round. There was no mention of the woman who covered the loft rent for 3 years so he could reinvest his capital, or the woman who edited his investor pitches until her eyes bled. She closed the tab, the sudden silence of her tiny, rented office space rushing back to fill the room. Her desk was a cheap laminate slab, a stark contrast to the luxury loft they had shared. She looked to the corner of the table. The chipped navy travel mug was sitting there, stripped of its original purpose. Because of the jagged white scar across the rim, it could no longer hold coffee. Instead, she had packed it tightly with her finest drafting pencils and a steel scale ruler. Her thumb rubbed the rough, unglazed edge of the break. For weeks, she had stayed up wondering how someone could carry out such a clinical, heartless exit. But looking at the tools standing upright inside the ruined mug, a cold, sharp clarity finally washed over her. Julian hadn't broken her. He had just stolen her scaffolding because he didn't know how to build his own foundation. Her phone buzzed. A prominent local developer she had cold called for days finally replied. "Reviewing your portfolio. Can you meet tomorrow at 9?" Clara gripped the chipped ceramic, her chest tightening with an earned, heavy determination. She pulled a fresh sheet of drafting paper across the desk. She was still bleeding internally, but she was finally drawing her own blueprint. The scent of sandalwood hit her before she even turned around. Clara kept her hand steady on her glass, her eyes locked on the brass plaque beneath the pavilion model. Lead architect, Clara Vance. "Clara." Julian stood behind her. The gallery lighting caught the hollow strain under his eyes, the slight, anxious tremor as he adjusted his watch. His launch had succeeded, yet he looked utterly consumed by his own momentum. "Julian," she said, her tone flat, conversational, and completely devoid of the anger he was likely bracing for. He looked at the plaque, his throat tightening. "I saw the feature. You built this." He took a half-step closer, dropping his voice into that urgent, manipulative frequency he used whenever he needed her to absorb his stress. "Look, about how I left. The pressure was breaking me. I panicked. But I miss you, Clara. Every morning I still look for you." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Julian froze, waiting for the tears or the validation he always extracted from her. But Clara just looked at him. She felt no rage, no desire for an apology, and absolutely no urge to save him anymore. He hadn't changed. He was just looking for a familiar pillar to hold him up. "I have to get back to my clients," she said softly. She offered a small, genuine smile, turned away from his unfinished sentence, and walked into the brightly lit crowd. Later in her studio, she picked up a pencil from the chipped navy travel mug. Her thumb tracked the jagged white scar on the rim. It wasn't ruined, it was just history. She took a deep breath, realizing the real victory wasn't his regret. It was the unshakable peace of finally belonging to herself. The most painful part isn't that he left when she needed him. It's that he only valued her strength when it was useful to his weakness. Have you ever funded someone else's dream, only for them to vanish the exact moment your own life got heavy? Let's talk below. Every single story matters. If Clara's journey made you feel seen today, subscribe to the Breakup Diaries. We share raw, authentic stories about navigating the deepest heartbreaks, not for revenge, but to help you find the quiet power of your own comeback.